at a map of the world pinned up on your wall, it projects this incredibly comforting feeling of absolute permanence.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like the continents just look like these fixed, immutable puzzle pieces that have finally settled into their rightful places. But what if I told you that you were actually living on a planet that is actively unzipping one of its largest land masses right beneath humanity's feet?
It really shatters that whole illusion of solid ground.
Yeah.
We are witnessing a remarkably rare event here. It's a real-time look at a continental breakup.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are taking a deep dive into an exhaustive synthesis of sources covering the East African Rift System, or the EARS.
Right.
Our mission today is to understand how this massive 6,000-kilometer fracture stretching from the Red Sea all the way down to Mozambique is fundamentally rewriting Earth's geography. And, it's rewriting our understanding of human evolution and even the very weather patterns of Africa.
It's just massive. The scale of the phenomenon is truly staggering. To put it in perspective, the massive African plate is actively bifurcating into two entirely distinct tectonic entities.
Wow.
Yeah, you have the Nubian plate to the west, which holds the vast majority of the continent, and the Somalian plate to the east, carrying the Horn of Africa. And right now, this divergence is happening at a rate of roughly 6 to 9 millimeters a year.
Which honestly doesn't sound like much.
It doesn't, no. I mean, that is roughly the speed at which your fingernails grow.
Right.
But while that slow creep seems imperceptible to a human lifespan, in geological terms, it is a highly dynamic, violent restructuring of the planet's outer shell.
So to really understand how an entire continent manages to break apart, we have to look deep underground, right? Like we have to look at the thermal engines powering this massive fracture.
Exactly. The foundational driving mechanism here is deeply rooted in the Earth's mantle. There's a massive thermal anomaly, often called the African superplume, and it's pushing superheated, gooey rock up from the deeper layers of the planet at the Afar Triple Junction.
That's where the Nubian, Somalian, and Arabian plates are all meeting and pulling apart, yeah.
Correct. Imagine a massive subterranean blowtorch. This ascending column of heat hits the underside of the rigid continental crust, transferring immense energy and causing severe tensional stress. It stretches, it fractures, and eventually it starts to drop.
The way the crust forms here is just wild to me. I like to think about it like pulling a hot piece of candy or, taffy.
That's a great analogy.
Because normally the continental crust is incredibly thick and robust, like over 35 kilometers thick. But when you look at the seismic data from the Turkana Rift, right on the border of Kenya and Ethiopia, it shows the crust there has stretched and thinned out to just 13 kilometers.
Yeah, and that 13-kilometer mark is highly critical. Geophysicists refer to this advanced phase of stretching as crustal necking.
Crustal necking.
Right. Think about pulling that piece of taffy until the middle gets dangerously thin right before it snaps. When the crust thins like that, it loses its structural integrity. That localized thinning strongly implies the transition from a continental rift to a full-blown oceanic spreading center.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The rift isn't just one long, uniform crack. It actually has a bit of a split personality.
It does.
There's the eastern branch and the western branch, and they behave completely differently.
The dichotomy between the two is staggering, honestly. The eastern branch, running through Ethiopia and Kenya, is the older of the two. Because the mantle plume has essentially melted the underside of the rock there, this branch is highly ductile.
So it's bendy.
Very bendy.
Oh.
It is absolutely dominated by magmatic activity. We're talking about massive shield volcanoes like Erta El, which literally has a permanent boiling lava lake at its summit.
And the sources say it has pumped out over 900,000 cubic kilometers of volcanic material. I mean, that is an absolutely unfathomable amount of lava.
It is. Because that immense thermal energy makes the crust so hot and pliable, the stretching is accommodated through continuous magmatic intrusion. The rock stretches like warm plastic, with magma just constantly filling the gaps.
But then you look at the western branch, which traces down through Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, and so on. It is younger, and structurally, it is much colder and thicker.
Right, so instead of stretching smoothly like warm plastic, it just snaps. Because it lacks that widespread magmatic lubrication, the accumulating tectonic stress has to release through violent, brittle mechanical failure.
Yikes.
Yeah, the western branch is highly seismically active. It produces massive, deep-focus earthquakes that originate over 20 kilometers deep underground. This violent snapping creates deep, asymmetrical half-gravens.
Half-graven. So imagine a massive stone trapdoor where only one side drops down.
Exactly.
And those sunken valleys eventually fill with water. That's how we get the African Great Lakes, like Lake Tanganyika. And on the flip side of that trapdoor, the edges of those snapping faults get thrust violently upward, creating towering elevations like the 5-kilometer-high Rwenzori Mountains.
It is a stark contrast. The east is defined by fire, lava, and ductile stretching, and the west is defined by bottomless lakes, towering mountains, and deep seismic shocks.
And caught right in the middle of these two diverging branches is one of the most bizarre anomalies in the whole system, the Victoria microplate.
Oh, this is fascinating.
While the major plates around it are essentially rotating clockwise, this massive chunk of land trapped between the branches is actively spinning backwards, counterclockwise.
What's fascinating here is how researchers actually figured out the mechanics of that backward spin. They used highly advanced laboratory modeling. They basically built a miniature, physically accurate Earth in a lab using quartz sand to represent the brittle crust and PDMS polymers to simulate the gooey mantle underneath.
I love how geologists play with extremely high-tech sandboxes to figure this stuff out. But how does a whole chunk of a continent spin in reverse?
Think of it like a giant gear caught between two massive conveyor belts that are moving away from each other. The rigid Tanzania craton underneath acts exactly like a geological rolling bearing or a locked cog.
Ah, I see.
Because the overlapping weaknesses of the rift are pulling in opposite directions, it literally forces that solid chunk of rock in the middle to torque and spin in reverse as the continent pulls apart around it.
Wait, hold on. We have subterranean blowtorches, taffy-like crust, and reverse-spinning microplates. But I have to push back a little on the timeline here.
Sure.
If these plates are separating at the speed my fingernails grow, is this actually a threat to anyone alive today? Or is this just a problem for geologists a million years from now?
It is a very real, immediate threat. While the overall process is a slow geodetic creep, all that accumulating strain can suddenly manifest as catastrophic violence. A premier example of true tectonic rupture occurred in September 2005 in the Dabuhu region of Ethiopia. In a highly compressed span of just 10 days, a massive underground injection of magma, a megadike, violently ripped open a 35-mile-long, 25-foot-wide chasm right at the surface.
10 days. For a 35-mile crack? That completely shatters the idea that continental drift is always a slow, imperceptible process.
It absolutely shattered the scientific consensus. It provided irrefutable proof that slow creep can suddenly result in catastrophic oceanic ridge-style ruptures right there on land.
But we have to contrast that with what happened in 2018. I remember seeing the viral videos of that massive crack tearing across the Mai Mahiu Narok highway in Kenya. People were panicking, saying the continent was splitting in two right before our eyes.
Yes, I remember that.
But that was actually a massive erosional fakeout, right?
It was heavily sensationalized, yes. Rigorous geological surveys concluded that the fissure was not a true tectonic rupture. If it were a plate separation, the opposing walls of the crack would fit together perfectly like puzzle pieces.
And they didn't.
No, they didn't. Instead, it was a massive erosional gully. Unprecedented heavy rainfall had washed away thick, unconsolidated layers of volcanic ash from Mount Longonot.
And that washed-away ash was just hiding an ancient fault line, so the plates weren't splitting that day. The rain just washed away the dirt, hiding a millions-of-years-old scar.
Exactly.
But there is a huge listener takeaway here when it comes to understanding how climate and geology interact. Because even though it wasn't a tectonic snap, it still destroyed a highway and threatens civil infrastructure.
Extreme meteorological events, which are continually worsened by climate change, are maliciously exploiting the rift's ancient, weakened topography. Whether it is sudden magma injections like in Dabuhu or rapid flash flood erosion like in Kenya, the physical legacy of this rift poses immense, unpredictable geohazards today.
So this ancient volcanic ash was a total menace to a Kenyan highway in 2018. But if we rewind the clock a few million years, that exact same destructive ash is actually the reason we know who our ancient ancestors are.
The paleontological implications are incredibly profound, yes.
The Turkana Basin is globally renowned as the cradle of humanity. We are talking about over 1,200 hominin fossils spanning 4 million years, including the famous 1.5 million-year-old Turkana boy.
It's an unprecedented fossil record.
For decades, the narrative was that humans evolved in this specific trench because the diverse microclimates forced us to adapt, to walk upright.
This raises an important question, though. Did early hominins truly only evolve in this specific geographic corridor because of those unique environmental pressures? Or is there an entirely different reason we find them all there?
Right, because the sources point out a massive paradigm shift. The 4 million-year timeline of that crustal necking we talked about earlier perfectly matches the age of the earliest fossils found there.
As the crust thinned down to that 13-kilometer failure point, the valley floor sank rapidly. This rapid subsidence created deep, low-energy basins with incredibly high sedimentation rates.
And when you combine those rapidly filling valleys with the frequent mineralizing volcanic ash falls from all those shield volcanoes, you get a mathematically ideal preservation matrix.
The rapid burial protected the organic remains from scavengers and weather. It essentially turned the rift into a massive fossil factory.
So the East African Rift isn't necessarily the exclusive birthplace of humanity. I mean, it's just a geological time capsule. It's a biological hard drive. Humanity likely lived all over the African continent, but the rift is simply where the tectonic tape recorder was running.
Precisely. It just happened to have the perfect drawing valleys and ash to safely bury and preserve the bones.
Oh, okay, so we've looked at the deep past and how this geology preserved history. Now, I want to accelerate the timeline. Let's fast forward 5 to 10 million years into the future. What happens when this 13-kilometer thick taffy finally snaps?
Well, if these massive plates keep moving at their current trajectory, models forecast the birth of Earth's sixth ocean basin. The crust drops entirely below sea level. Right now, there is a crucial 65-foot-high ridge of land in Eritrea that acts as a dam, blocking the Red Sea. Once that barrier is breached, oceanic waters from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden will violently cascade southward, fully flooding the Afar Depression.
And the Somalian plate detaches entirely into the Indian Ocean. So what does this all mean, specifically for the geopolitical map of Africa?
The macroeconomic implications present an extreme socioeconomic paradox, especially for currently landlocked nations situated along that snapping western branch.
Right, let's look at Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi. Currently, they face heavy transit tariffs and rely on countries like Kenya and Tanzania to move goods. But in this future scenario, they suddenly possess sovereign deep-water coastlines.
The long-term logistical pros would be immense. No more heavy transit tariffs, direct integration into global maritime shipping, unmediated access to deep-sea internet cables, and immense coastal geothermal power.
That's the pro. But the con is that the human and ecological cost to get there is literally apocalyptic. You highlighted Rwanda's capital, Kigali. It currently sits over 1,500 meters above sea level and is densely packed with 1.2 million people.
The tectonic violence preceding this new ocean, the deep focus earthquakes, the hypervolcanism, and the eventual catastrophic marine flooding of the Great Lakes Basin will force the mass displacement of tens of millions of people.
It's hard to even picture.
It will completely destroy fertile terrestrial habitats. The transition is not peaceful. It's an era of absolute environmental destruction before a new coastal equilibrium is reached.
But wait, before we assume this new ocean is a guaranteed fact, we have to look up. We have to look at the atmosphere above the rift and the global tectonic forces that might actually completely halt the process.
Right, the climatological feedbacks. The rift system actively manipulates weather. Millions of years ago, uplifting rift shoulders literally acted as physical walls, blocking moisture originating from the dense Congo Basin.
So it dried out East Africa.
Exactly. This tectonic blockade dried out the East African plateau, transitioning it into a savanna. But atmospheric models project that rising greenhouse gases could dramatically disrupt things, potentially doubling the region's short rains by the year 2100.
Though predicting this accurately is remarkably tricky, isn't it? Our advanced climate models, like the CMIP5 framework, systemically overestimate these rains.
Yes, because of sea surface temperature biases. The computer simulations essentially assume the water in the western Indian Ocean is warmer than it actually is. That throws off the math, predicting massive rainstorms that might not actually materialize.
And the climate isn't the only uncertainty. There is actually a massive ongoing debate among geophysicists about whether this rift will even succeed in forming an ocean at all.
Yes, the Alakojan debate.
Right. Will it oceanize or will it fail?
We have to impartially lay out both sides here. The case for successful oceanization points to the highly advanced crustal stretching we discussed. At 13 kilometers thick, it's exploiting ancient inherited structural weaknesses.
And the Red Sea proves the Afar superplume has the thermal power to finish the job.
Exactly. But then you have the counter-argument for an aborted rift, or nalacogen. In an RRR triple junction, where three cracks meet, it is a common geological occurrence for the third arm to just starve of energy and fail.
Plus, Africa isn't just sitting still. The whole continent is drifting north toward Eurasia. Over the next 200 million years, the assembly of the next supercontinent, Pangea Ultima, will create overwhelming compressive forces.
Those global forces could literally slam the East African rift shut, freezing it in place. They have historical analogs for this. The mid-continent rift system in North America produced immense volumes of magma millions of years ago, but abruptly failed and froze due to broader global plate shifts.
Just gets squished back together.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, whether the East African rift succeeds in forming Earth's sixth ocean, or fails and just becomes a subterranean scar, it remains Earth's ultimate terrestrial laboratory for planetary mechanics.
It really is an incredible journey. I mean, we started with a massive thermal superplume stretching the Earth's crust like warm taffy. Yeah. We explored how those sinking valleys created a biological time capsule that perfectly preserved the origins of humanity. And we looked at a geopolitical paradox that could birth a new ocean or just leave a massive fossilized fault line in the dirt.
It forces us to recognize that the ground beneath our feet is a dynamic, living system.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this leaves you looking at the world around you with just a little more curiosity. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if the extreme subsidence and volcanic ash of the East African Rift perfectly preserved the bones of early hominins for 4 million years, what remnants of our modern cities, our highways, and our technology might this exact same unzipping rift be perfectly burying today, just preserving them for some unknown civilization to discover millions of years from now?
Wow, that's a haunting thought.
Keep digging, and we will see you next time.